So this morning, I'm delighted to introduce Hassan, who is the Legislative Director for Middle East Policy for FCNL. I'm going to read a little bit about him. He has a passion for foreign affairs that's rooted in his desire to make life better for people in the Middle East, including his extended family in Jordan. He's convinced that advancing a more peaceful and diplomatic-based foreign policy in the Middle East is critical, not only for the family he loves, but for peace and stability worldwide. And he's been a very effective and successful lobbyist for just foreign policy and as well as for FCNL. So it's really so wonderful that you're here with us today, and we're eager to hear what you have to say about the situation in Yemen. Thank you for joining us, Hassan.
Uh, Thank you so much for that introduction, Anthony. Steve, your words were really powerful this morning, and I appreciate those as well. This is a really trying time on the heart, so I hope you all are taking care. It's a trying time for people that love peace, and we're here today because we think that babies in Ukraine have the same value as babies in Yemen, as babies in Ethiopia, as babies in Palestine, as babies in Iran, as babies right here in the United States, and that all life has value. You wouldn't know that by watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC. It doesn't seem, a lot of people are saying this is the biggest, it could potentially be the biggest war since World War II. And the key is in Europe. You got to add that in Europe part because Afghanistan, massive war, 2 decades. Iraq, massive war, killed 1 million people. In the past few decades. Yemen, the world's worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, with 16.2 million people living on the edge of famine. So I just think it's really important that we have, a real, wide context for how we have these discussions and not root it in this sort of white centric, frame that we so often do. I want to say that the U.S. and NATO have, really in the post Cold War, they've really been confrontational. They've toppled governments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, and have been bullying weaker countries on the world stage for decades. This behavior is undermining international law and global stability for everyone and is being used as a justification for authoritarians to do their own major violations of human rights. I think about the hypocrisy of being, people, Linda Thomas Greenfield at the UN saying, we shouldn't allow Russian aggression to continue. We shouldn't have annexation of any of these places in Ukraine. As our government is literally funding UAE's, the United Arab Emirates, annexation of Socotra and different parts of Yemen. So I just want to put that out there. But I also don't think that that should be a distraction from the real, crisis that's happening in Ukraine right now. This is a massive crisis. Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and now innocent people are going to die because a world power chose to illegally attack its neighbor, and that must be condemned as well. Like I said, babies in Ukraine, babies in Yemen, babies in Palestine, babies in Iran, they all have life, they all have value, and we need to do what we can. Unfortunately, the situation in Ukraine is something that we don't have a lot of leverage right now to impact. I think we should, support no unauthorized war. We should not be sending weapons. I think broad-based economic sanctions could hurt, civilians in Russia. We don't want that either. Those civilians are out there on the streets protesting what's going on. Why are we attacking them? Why are we hurting those people? And so we need to resolve this diplomatically. But there is something that we can do for peace right now, and that is on Yemen. We have real leverage here to end the Saudi blockade and war on Yemen. And that's what I want to talk to you all about today. Because I think as peace activists, we also have to be a little strategic. Like, we cannot fix every problem in the world, but there's something very unique about the Yemen situation that I'm going to get into in a little bit today and show that we have a path forward, a really credible path forward to address this crisis. And I think, with maybe a little bit of help from you all, we can get this done this year. So before I jump into this whole, I get this whole speech prepared, about the conflict in Yemen, I want to tell a little bit about my own story and how I got to this place. I think with that, maybe you can get to know a little bit about me and show that, I'm actually from California. I was born in Sacramento. I lived in the Bay Area for quite a while. I was a full-time musician before wearing a suit and tie on the Hill, which I sometimes I wonder why I did that, why I left the music world. But know that I'm still playing music all the time, writing tunes, alongside my advocacy. So in early January 2015, my world actually changed. I went from, being that musician, and my dad called me to inform me that my cousin Muath, he was a Royal Jordanian Air Force pilot. He'd actually been captured and burned alive by ISIL after his fighter jet crashed over Syria. And I hadn't actually ever met him, but my heart really just pounded with grief as I listened to my dad, tell me that he had died. And he just said in this most angry voice I've ever heard him say, he's like, Jordan's going to take revenge. And he was so upset. And, after experiencing, years of anti-Arab racism, after years of watching the U.S. do these regime change wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere, it was too much. It was sort of like this breaking point for me, and I just could not sit by. I studied politics. I'd been doing my music thing, but I said I got to be part of the solution, and I think many people on this call maybe can kind of resonate with that, because you all are dedicated and been doing this a lot longer than I have even. But I just was determined to be part of the solution. So I started working for, I did some campaigns. I actually helped Dean Preston in San Francisco get elected. I don't know if you know him. He's on the board of supervisors right now. But I did that, and I took that experience and got a job with Chicago Area Peace Action. One of the things we did was put on events, and I invited Shireen Alademi, who was a Yemeni activist scholar that many of you may know of, and she's also a contributor to In These Times magazine. She just explained what was going on in Yemen. I didn't really know. Even though my family's from there, I didn't know. I was, just a guy watching the news like everybody else, and she taught me what was going on and what was going on with U.S. military aid. I learned that our military support under Obama, under Trump, and under Biden, had been ongoing, and that the Saudi-led coalition was trying to restore Yemen's ousted government by conducting offensive operations. It began with airstrikes and the naval blockade, and she explained how the Saudi war had pushed millions to the brink of famine, and that the Saudis were actually using starvation in their war against the Yemeni people. It gave me a real great sense of urgency, not just because of the humanitarian crisis, but U.S. complicity in it. Again, there are a lot of horrible things happening in the world that, I wish we could do more. I think humanitarian aid is a great thing in certain contexts. I don't like it to be used to exploit, but there are a lot of situations where we don't have a lot of control. But I learned that, my God, this is something that we can do something about, and that Congress has the War Powers Resolution. It was passed in 1973, during the Vietnam War, and can be used to trigger votes to actually end support. So I got hired by Just Foreign Policy. I was, they sent me on a 1-month contract. So I was in Chicago, and then I bought my first suit actually. And I got a pair of shoes, and I slapped my guitar in the back of my Chrysler Voyager, and I drove across country. Half the country. As a musician, I've actually toured around the U.S. about 8 or 9 times. So I've probably been to a venue near you, including Strawberry Music Festival in Cali, which it was my favorite. But I get out there, we start lobbying. We end up passing this Yemen War Powers resolution. It was right after Khashoggi was brutally murdered by the Saudis, and a lot of that anger against what Saudi was doing, not just in Yemen but also against journalists, boiled over, and we were able to build support. And that was a really amazing, life-changing moment for me. And then Just Foreign Policy said, "Wow, you're pretty good at building coalitions out there in D.C. Why don't you stay?" And so I kept going, and we then did another vote, SJ Res 7, that passed in 2019. Unfortunately, Trump vetoed it. And these war powers resolutions would end the ongoing participation, not weapon sales. This is actually targeted specifically at the military aid, the participation, the maintenance, spare parts, logistical support, intelligence sharing, and the targeting assistance, and even the mid-air refueling that was going on. So it sent a really powerful signal that, Congress and the American people don't want to be part of this brutal Saudi campaign in Yemen. And we got, it was kind of an amazing coalition. We had Code Pink to the Koch Institute. We had, Yemenis with veterans. We had, secular people, religious people, people of, Muslims, Christians, Jews coming together to work on this stuff. We had so many parts of our society speaking out, and we did something pretty historic together. And I think probably a lot of people in this call were part of that victory. Unfortunately, Trump did veto it, but I still think it was an important moment. And it pushed for the Stockholm Agreement. This was an agreement to get the warring parties in Yemen to not attack Hodeidah. I think that was really significant. It prevented this, massive, cutoff of humanitarian aid. And that was, aid to millions of people. When Congress forced more votes, we actually saw the UAE draw down militarily. They're still there. They're still working through proxies. They've recently stepped up their involvement. But Congress reasserted itself. The UAE didn't want to take the PR hit. They started to withdraw. And we actually saw a major reduction in cross-border violence. And this was under Trump. This was under the Trump administration. We got Congress to do this. They ended mid-air refueling. Not everything, but they did something. And then, we saw we saw a revival of negotiations. Fortunately, after Congress, stripped out this provision, the National Defense Authorization Act, we saw the violence really escalate. So while I was in, D.C., I just was continually crossing paths with FCNL, Friends Committee on National Legislation. Really impressed by a lot of the work they do, and they poached me and they said, why don't you help us with our Middle East work? And, I gotta say, there's not a lot of, people that are of Middle Eastern descent in this policy world. So appreciate being here with all y'all, because it gets, I think more voices are needed. People that can really see what's going on and have been impacted by some of these policies directly. We saw Biden came in, a lot of hope, a lot of promise. He ran on ending support for the war. He said Saudi was a pariah. MBS was not a good guy. I mean, we all knew that, but it was nice to have the president finally saying that. He said he would end support for offensive operations. So this was, I was ready to bust out the champagne. I called up Shireen right after that executive order. That was almost a year ago this month. It was a year ago this month. And Shireen cried to me on the phone. This is my mentor, my Yemeni activist mentor. And we were skeptical. We didn't know where this was going, but he said we're going to end support for offensive weapons and all this stuff. He had appointed a new U.S. envoy to Yemen, Tim Lenderking. He, rescinded a foreign terrorist organization designation on the Houthis, which we were really worried that was going to cut off humanitarian aid. We were worried it was going to make diplomacy a lot harder. So that was a good thing. He restored humanitarian aid and USAID funding to all parts of Yemen, and made a promise that he was going to do what they were going to take ending this war really seriously. Unfortunately, the devil's kind of always in the details here, and offensive support was never really defined. What is offensive support? What's defensive support? I think David Swanson's, his book and the excerpt that Steve read so eloquently, really rings true here. And like they're justifying this ongoing thing and saying, well, Saudi's behaving now, but I'm looking at it and saying, hey, wait a second. Saudi still has this crazy blockade. They're blocking the flow of fuel. Yemen needs about 544,000 metric tons of fuel to get into the country each month. And it's actually less fuel than under the Trump administration is getting into Yemen right now under the Biden administration. In December, it was about 4% of their monthly fuel needs. In January, is about 5%. I haven't looked at the February numbers, but that is significantly lower than what they need. And unfortunately, you think fuel, that impacts a whole bunch of other things. It increases the prices of medicine. It makes it so it's hard to operate hospitals. And 50% of the hospitals in Yemen already have been destroyed because of the fighting, because of the conflict. We've got, like I said before, 16 million people on the brink of famine. That number has increased under Biden. We've got 400,000 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And regardless whether or not they survive, they're going to have cognitive issues their entire life. We're talking a generation of children are going to be suffering as a result of this war on Yemen. And I know that's really hard on the heart. These are statistics, but each of these numbers are families. I remember I was watching David Beasley. He's the he was the former governor of South Carolina, now director of the World Food Program. He asked a doctor at a hospital in northern Yemen, well, what happens? These hospitals are so filled. What happens to the families? Like if you can't treat the children, they said, well, we send them home to die. That's the reality of what's going on in Yemen right now. So I just say all this to you. So I think as we discuss and watch what's unfolding in Ukraine, I think it's really important that we not lose focus on this. I think it's actually more urgent than ever that we get our own house in order, not just for Yemen, but for this whole world order. Because if we don't, things are just going to keep getting worse. I guarantee it. We need a resurgence of this peace movement. Y'all give me a lot of hope because you've been sticking it out, making this happen. I'm the newbie here. I'm the new kid on the block. I'm doing what I can. They're beating me up a little bit in DC, but know that I'm trying and that there are people here that really care. And with that, I, will say that last year was kind of a busy year for me. I did a lot of stuff, not just writing tunes and playing music, but we got over 100 members of Congress to say, hey, Biden, we don't like the Saudi blockade. We FCNL, we led a letter. We got 70 plus groups on it. We got Mark Ruffalo. We got the whole Joaquin Phoenix family to sign on to this thing. I think we got Danny Glover. Marianne Williamson put her name on. Sarah Silverman joined in. So I like that. But the Hulk is my favorite, I got to say. Getting the Hulk on board. He's with us. So that was cool. That prompted Rep. Dingell to lead a almost 80-member letter in the House. And then we got Rep. Deutsch and Rep. Meeks. These are the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Middle East Subcommittee. These are important guys in the House of Representatives. They led a letter saying, hey, let's end this blockade. Love it. Let's decouple it from ongoing negotiations. Telling Saudi, I don't care what your justification is. You cannot use the blockade as leverage. That's a violation of international law. That's starving people to get a political outcome that you want. That's not okay. Then we got Senator Warren to lead a letter. She got 16 of her colleagues in the Senate. And then finally, we got Menendez, Schumer, and Reid. These are the top people in the Democratic Party in the Senate. So that was good. Unfortunately, the Biden administration didn't really budge. We got Lender King saying, hey, Saudi, you got to lift these restrictions, but they didn't really go for it. And unfortunately, the blockade remained in place, and we're saying, okay, well, if you're not going to do that way, let's try to pass some legislation. So in the NDAA last year in September, we actually passed another resolution, or another amendment, I should say, to cut off all military aid to the Saudis. We got 219 votes in the House. And unfortunately, as things do, this National Defense Authorization Act, this behemoth, this leviathan of war and militarism, didn't include our provision. So even though we got a majority in the House, we weren't able to get it across the finish line. So what do, right? Well, we got to dust off the old war powers resolution. This, to me, is our golden ticket, because we've tried everything else, and now we're in this unique moment, and we have to do something. So luckily, I'll say a couple things. How am I doing on time? Doing good? Okay, I'll keep going a little bit. Cut me off. Sometimes I blab on too long.
No, you're doing very well. As you approach 9 o'clock or 10 to 9, you may want to go for questions and answers.
Okay, I'll kind of go for it here. So this month, Reps Pramila Jayapal, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House, and Rep Peter DeFazio, another great member of Congress, they do exist, by the way. They announced in the nation that they're going to be introducing a new Yemen war powers resolution, and this is aimed at cutting off the ongoing military support. Where Biden said, okay, we ended targeting assistance, but the spare parts and maintenance for these Saudi warplanes are critical. I cannot stress this enough. While we may have ended some things, the daily transfer of these spare parts, this is what's keeping the warplanes in the air. You can't just go get an F-15 tire at Walmart. I'm sorry, I've tried. No, actually, I haven't tried. But I know for a fact that you can't. And you can only get them from U.S. contractors, and those contractors need to be approved by DOD, State Department, and they need to be overseen. The transfer of these parts need to be overseen by U.S. military personnel. So we're putting that in this War Powers Act and saying that Saudi, we're trying to cut this off. So I'm very excited that we've got members that are going to push for a full floor vote in the House to end ongoing U.S. complicity, because we've got a lot of work to do, and among advocates like myself who've really long urged that the U.S. end its role, we saw I felt very disappointed at the Biden administration not really following through on their promise, and now with continued U.S. support, Saudi is really carrying out a major escalation in its brutal air campaign, and made January like pretty much one of the bloodiest months of the war. Recent airstrikes targeted a detention center and vital communications infrastructure that killed 90 civilians in one air raid and wounded 200 more. They triggered a nationwide internet blackout in January for 4 days, and my God. That's just horrible. And then they also cut off water in Sada, the northern province, for 120,000 people. Can you imagine that? Not having water? In a country that already has a terrible cholera epidemic. So for years, the U.S. has enabled these vicious attacks, and it is long past time for complicity to end. And unfortunately, the Saudis, with the Biden policy, just as we expected, did not change their behavior. You know, they're still doing all of the same things. They're conducting as many airstrikes under Biden as they did Trump. You know, they've doubled down on the blockade, as I talked about, and now World Food Program is saying that the blockade needs to be lifted as a humanitarian act, and you know, otherwise we could be seeing, the stage being set for the world's worst famine in modern history. So I said Congress did this in the past. They passed this WPR. That's what gives me a little bit of hope, is that we've already got these folks on the record doing this in the past, and we have a path forward. Like I said, on Ukraine, it's hard to see a real path forward of how we could, you know, impact that situation. I hope to God they don't send in, U.S. troops, because I think that would just make it even worse and drag this out way longer. But here we have a real path forward. And in a second, I'm going to say how you all actually have a really important role to play because you live in LA. So after a year of failed Yemen policy by Biden, and repeated attempts by Congress to really course correct here, lawmakers, I think, are left with about two options. They could do nothing, turn a blind eye to craven U.S. complicity, or they could pass a Yemen War Powers resolution to bring this war and conflict to an end. I'm not going to say it's magically going to end the war in Yemen. There's a lot of things that need to be settled out. But we know from history is that when these wars become proxy wars, when international coalitions and foreign countries get involved, whether it be the U.S., Canada, France, Germany. Germany is no longer involved, but the UK, whether it be Iran, whether it be Saudi or the UAE, that these things just drag out. And we are approaching, in March, the 7th anniversary of the Saudi-led war in Yemen. So we are getting close to that. We have these members of Congress. I would love to say that this Ukraine stuff doesn't affect what we're trying to do here, but it does. We were hoping to get this bill introduced. We're in the process of writing it now. We have a first draft already, but that may be pushed back. But I'm urging that those staffers try to get it introduced by March 25, the 7th anniversary, saying, we cannot allow one more year of this war. Let's get this introduced. And I think, by forcing more votes to prohibit this unauthorized military support, Congress can do its part to pressure the warring parties to sit at the bargaining table and help bring this war to an end. And I'll just leave you with that. Rep. Adam Schiff has been good on this in the past. He's one of your LA representatives. And getting him to be an original co-sponsor of this bill could help us tremendously. So if you all want to be a part of this, want to help get Rep. Schiff on board, somehow I looked at my calendar. I have 2 meetings with their office today, one at 1, one at 2. So when I'm done with this call, I'm going to be talking to him directly. I was on the radio with Scott Horton talking to the LA area, recently. I have another call on Middle Eastern Focus. I think KPFK, where I'm talking to them on Sunday about this whole this mess, and I'm going to be repeating Adam Schiff's name many times in these calls, and would love a little support from y'all. With that, I will leave it and take your questions. Appreciate you all you being here. And I don't know what the best way. I like to keep it a little loose, as you might be able to tell. Maybe it's the musician part of my brain. If you all just want to ask the questions, I could call on people, or you could just kind of.
Phil, you're on mute. If you want to call on people, come off mute.
Yeah, sorry. I think I see Stephen and Steve's hands go up here, and Anthony. So, Steve, why don't you hit it here?
Well, thank you, Hassan, very much. A deep and accessible talk, but more so for what you do when you wake up every day. And we love the path that has brought you to this work. ICUJP stands with you, so we will think in activist and advocacy terms in what you're recommending. And we've met with Adam Schiff, and I'm sure that Anthony's lobbying instincts are already rolling. But I want to ask you to broaden it out slightly. What are you hearing? Where is the resistance from the Biden administration coming from to end the blockade, to fully support these efforts to defeat the Saudi military and blockade effort? So why is that happening? And that's really an advocacy question of how do we answer any criticisms or any arguments against the legislative program you're supporting.
Really, thank you, Steve, for those kind words, and I'm glad what I said resonated. So the U.S.-Saudi partnership, it's unofficial, but it's been going on since 1945. Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz, they kind of unofficially began this partnership. And under the agreement, Saudi would receive U.S. security assistance in exchange for granting United States access to oil tied to the U.S. dollar. It's essentially, in a nutshell, what's been going on, and there's kind of been an inertia ever since. Obviously, that's changing a lot post 9/11, post the assassination of Khashoggi, and post the in the middle of this brutal Yemen war. The American public, when polled, they don't care if it's offensive or defensive weapons. They don't want to support it. In December, we had 60% of Republican voters say we don't want any part of this. We don't want to sell them any kind of weapons. So I'll just say things are definitely changing, but unfortunately, there's a bit of like homeostasis. I think we deal with this on the micro level with our personal relationships and our families, but we deal with it on the macro level too. Like things just don't really want to change. And unfortunately, this has been continuing all during the Biden administration. I will say that, a way that I would push back is say, well, Congress gets to decide. I'm sorry, Biden. This is not your decision. This is under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Congress, not the president, gets to determine whether or not we send U.S. forces or security assistance to foreign powers as they are engaged in hostilities. So, my answer would be too bad, bro. And we should get Congress to kind of reassert itself. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. That that maybe that's not going to be convincing to everybody, but we think it's really important that Congress take back its constitutional war authority on this question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think Stephen Fisk was next here.
Yes, thank you, Hassan, for being with us this morning and for your words and for your advocacy. And I can certainly relate. I am also a musician, a songwriter, and a peace activist. So I relate big time to who you are and what you're doing. Could you give us a little bit of historic background as to how this war in Yemen, what is the derivation of it? What is the roots of it? How did it come to reach this point right now? Maybe I missed it if you didn't give it before, but if you could, thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe I should have explained more of that in my discussion. So Yemen's political instability began after a 2011 Arab Spring uprising that ousted President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been in power since 1990. Then Vice President Hadi became Yemen's interim president for what was supposed to be a 2-year term during a transition to a more representative form of government with regular elections. And in 2014, Yemeni frustration with rampant corruption, unemployment, rising fuel prices led to unrest all across Yemen. And taking advantage of that situation, the Houthis, they were a political armed movement that originated from the Houthi tribe, entered Sana'a in September with the assistance of ex-President Saleh and put Hadi under house arrest. In 2015, with the stated goal of restoring Hadi to power, Saudi Arabia joined forces with the UAE and formed a coalition, and they were backed by the United States, UK, France, Canada, and Saudi, framed this whole conflict in sectarian terms, insisting that Iran was supporting the Houthis, and then in March 2015, the Saudi-led coalition began conducting airstrikes and imposing a really brutal naval blockade of the country and civilian infrastructure. Saudi backed the Hadi government for many reasons. They've always been in control of Yemen. They were alarmed by the rise of the Houthis. They thought they were backed by their main regional competitor. There is some truth to that, but it's definitely exaggerated. They're worried about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait off the coast of Yemen. It's a critical oil shipping lane that links the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and facilitates the movement of millions of barrels of oil a day. It also served the political ambitions of Saudi Defense Minister, now Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, otherwise known as MBS. And he kind of used this conflict to kind of catapult his political ambitions. He, like I said, he superseded cousins and brothers. I'm not the historical scholar on that whole Saudi royal family, but he leapfrogged over everybody and is now the Saudi crown prince, is de facto ruler of the country. Last but not least, they wanted to have a pipeline going through Yemen so they could, bypass the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Strait of Hormuz and just go right into the Red Sea. The Houthis have, fought this guerrilla war, and they've basically, now governed 80% of the country. And some people say that they're on, really on the path to winning this war. And without U.S. military support, there's no way that the Hadi government, who has no legitimacy, they're based in Riyadh. They're actually using ISIL forces, aka the Muslim Brotherhood, to fight a lot of these wars, a lot of these conflicts. I could say more, but maybe I'll just leave it at that. I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks. I think Fernando is next up.
Yes, first of all, I'd really like to thank you for your presentation. This is really, I know all about this, what's happening in Yemen, This is also nothing new to me because as a Filipino, we experienced many of this, like in 1898, total, 10% of our total population was massacred or killed by the United States, when we won our revolution against Spain, only to be stolen by the United States. And this is nothing new. The silence of the corporate media is really evident, as you stated earlier, that, while our people is getting killed, left and right, the continuous business with Saudi, though the United States knows that this weaponry is killing many of these children and many innocent people, And of course, I'm still disturbed because, though we are very busy on the street, protesting and so forth, to stop many of this war, but the silence of the government itself, though you did a good work in lobbying and so forth, and I'm still puzzled because it seems they're not really listening to us. We're on the street. We are, you're doing your lobbying and so forth, and it seems there's no answer. It seems this really corporate, monopoly capitalist is really the one who's doing many of these criminal acts. I think these people are a bunch of criminal to allow this, massacre of the Yemenis people. So I just leave it on that. And I guess my question is, what is the best solution or best approach? Because I'm puzzled and
Yeah.
let's leave it for that.
Fernando, completely feel that frustration, you empathize with it, and it's important, right? We're being ignored, we've been pounding the pavement. But I'll also say that we did something that no one ever thought was possible in passing some of these resolutions. And when that did happen, we drove a whole bunch of media. The media started covering the Yemen war after we started forcing votes on the floor of the House and Senate. And that to me is the strategy of the grassroots, the power of the War Powers Act, because a lot of these resolutions get caught up in committee. You know that song, I'm just a bill, I'm only a bill. There's one part of that song where the bills just kind of get stuck in committee, but the War Powers Act is special. We should do our own song of the War Powers Act, actually. I wrote a kid's book about the War Powers Act called We Stand Up for What's Right, kind of teaching the story, using animals as the personified. But when we can force these floor votes, then we start driving the media narrative. And I've had conversations with a bunch of mainstream reporters. I spoke with CNN actually last week, getting them ready for this, like making sure that they know it and they're very interested in this story. And that's to me how we win, is we get members of Congress and mainstream media to speak out about what's happening on the House and Senate floor. As far as the larger question, how do we push back against this corporatocracy? We need nothing short of a massive transformation as a society. We need to think bigger than we ever thought before. We need to think about how can we bring in new people to this movement? How can we reach out to these college campuses, get them trained up? How can we reach out to climate activists and show that we have a connection here? I think maybe we need to have a national dialogue of our own here in the U.S. and pull together people from leadership of these different movements who are all getting screwed over under the Biden administration. It seems like immigration, climate change, and anti-war people have a lot in common right now. So that's where I'm at, and Black Lives Matter. I think we have a lot in common. And getting on the same page right now, it's going to take new ways of thinking in ways we haven't. We got to push ourselves, but I'm ready. I'll be out. I'll be doing it. And one other thing I say, let's make the peace movement sound good again. I think we need a little bit of music here. I want to see concerts all over the country bringing people together, because that's how we fight these people. And I got to say, I've pissed these people off. I'm just saying. We can upset the apple cart here, and upset the apple cart, and we do it by being able to bring out it doesn't even take thousands. Even if we get hundreds of people at these congressional offices, that's going to make a big difference. So we have a roadmap here. We just got to put in the elbow grease. I'll be working on that. I know you all will be as well, but don't lose hope. Don't be despair. I think one thing we can't do is give up.
Thank you. Hey, Anthony, I think you're on.
So thank you, Hassan. I love your spirit. I love how you combine your passion with a remarkable intelligence and background research. It's just really impressive. So I have a question for our group as well as for you. I'm often the person who organizes lobby visits for ICUJP Just I want to see a show of hands of how many of you would like to go on a lobby visit to speak to our senators about this issue. If you can just show your interest, just great. All right. So we will have a lobby visit, Hassan, and we'll be inviting people not just from our organization, but from our partner organizations to be involved. So my question to you is, where is Feinstein and Padilla on this? Have they shown any interest in curtailing our military involvement with the Saudis, and especially with respect to Yemen?
Great question. I just dropped FCNL's action link on the Yemen War Powers resolution. It's got some good framing. It like puts in a nice lobby ask. So if you want to follow, that template, I think that could be super useful. Just pounding the pavement, getting them heard. And Anthony, thank you for the kind words. I'm inspired by you all as well. I feel that. So as far as Padilla, the good news is that Padilla just voted to block the recent weapons sale package to Saudi Arabia in December. I think Padilla's with us. Feinstein, unfortunately, did not. Feinstein, she voted against that resolution of disapproval, saying that we support Saudi Arabia defense. Okay, let's just couch that. We don't have to be mortal enemies for all time. I think there's still a path there. She did sign the Senator Warren letter calling for an end to the blockade, and if the blockade's not ended, let's leverage U.S. military support. So that's a good thing. I think the ask for Feinstein is be like, hey, thank you for signing this Warren letter. I wouldn't even bring up the weapons sale vote. I would just put that aside. The weapons sales obviously matter, but it doesn't actually matter as much as this War Powers resolution. The War Powers resolution is, are we going to continue sustaining these aircraft? They can't fire these missiles if they're not flying. So that's my angle. And she's voted with us in the past. She voted for the old Yemen War Powers. She signed this letter. And I would say now, when this thing comes for a vote, we want your support. We're still in talks with Bernie and Warren and others to try to get this introduced on the Senate side. It's definitely moving in the House, but that's part of the holdup is we're trying to secure some Senate co-leads. And if we get that, then the question will come to their desk. I think it's great to schedule meetings now, but focusing on Schiff in the interim is really good because there's not a Senate bill really in the works just yet. So that's how I would recommend. But you got a really strong advocate in Padilla. One thing you could potentially ask these folks to do is to lift up the Nation article that Jayapal and DeFazio published. Let me just drop that in the chat here. If you could get any of these folks to retweet this article, I think that would be a really good step. Just say, hey, we got some action. Let's support the good work of Jayapal and DeFazio.
All right. I think Barbara, you were up next.
I just need to know how to contact Schiff, and I think you're putting things in the chat, and I don't know how to get things out of the chat.
I don't know if Phil or
I'll try to write a letter and send it to all these different people.
That's great.
If I may suggest, we'll do an after meeting action, Hassan. Anthony and you and I can work on an email. We have a full list of activists, so we can reach beyond the folks on the call today. And we'll organize that in terms of priorities, links to your letters, your toolkit, your activist package as well.
And then that letter will come out as an email to all of us?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Figure out how to turn on my,
Okay.
yeah.
We have Carol Francis and then Jasmine.
Trying to figure out how to take down my hand.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm really interested in the whole thing. You mentioned the oil pipeline that is wanted to go through, and that's part of the problem. And you also mentioned the need to bring in as many different organizations, including the environmental movement. So being as stopping pipelines through anybody's land is a big thing right now. To what extent are we working on getting anti-pipeline people on board with this?
I would say, you tell me. I think we need help right now. I will say that we are, trying to do all we can. And if folks know Bill McKibben, we need him to come out and help us out. I think this is a great idea. I've certainly tried, not always with the greatest success. But yeah, getting the environmental movement to say, hey, this is a huge issue, that the Saudis are pumping all this oil, it's polluting, and we need a little solidarity. A lot of people call it intersectionality. I like that word kind of, but I think solidarity is more my speed. Let's dust that one off. I'm not saying we can't use intersectionality, but a lot of people just point out that, hey, all these things are connected, but I'm like, to me it's a verb, It's a verb. It means, like, what are we actually doing? How are we standing together? And I think we could really use their help right now. I wish we need all the creative ideas. But as far as the oil pipeline is from Saudi Arabia to Al Mahra. It's the far east province of Yemen, and they're trying to go right through. Saudi has, this is one of the only places in Yemen where Saudi actually has its own troops there, and they're occupying that area, and they're, cracking down on protesters. They're, detaining people, disappearing people, and there have been peaceful protests in the streets, and they get really broken up by the Saudi forces. The Saudis are too chicken to actually go on the front lines. They go way far away from those front lines because they're a completely incompetent military and government. So that's how I feel about that. I think if folks have connections with the environmental movement, I think that's great. It's something I personally haven't put a lot of time in, but I think we should.
Well, specifically, if you have anything written up about specifically the oil pipeline issue, and also the fact, of course, that war is an environmental disaster, every bomb that's dropped, but specifically about the pipeline and what you just said about the occupation of that province, I think that would be very useful.
Great. I just dropped a link about this is a little bit old, but the pipeline's still in the works. Maybe start there and continue your research, but I love that thinking.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, Jasmine, you're up now. Jasmine?
Okay. How can
Did we lose her?
Your vocal isn't coming through here.
I think she may have dropped off. Maybe she'll call back.
Okay, I don't see any other hands here. Oh, wait a minute.
Ruby's trying to get your attention, I believe.
Ruby's got a physical hand sticking up there.
Yes, I don't know if you, yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. because
Yeah.
I changed to my computer.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so grateful. You've clarified so many different things. And I'm thinking if each one of us went out, and I'm stressing myself, and knew all the organizations, and I was just thinking about getting the ministers together, you know, of all the different nationalities, all the different churches and everything, and get the heads in, like in Los Angeles, even, you know, to go back to their different parishes or churches and then take it to all of their people. You know, I'm just thinking of that. I'm just excited, and I'm wondering how soon this recording will be there so that, you know, we can pass it on to people that we know. So that's one thing I'm asking both.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the recording, but I love that idea. I could not love that idea more often. I really think, want to get kind of metaphysical here. Everything's a fractal.
Yeah.
My eyeball looks like a universe. The things that we're trying to do here at the national level, trying to organize, faith leaders, we got to do that at the local level. We got to get every city going, like passing resolutions through city councils, getting faith leaders involved. I think a minister letter to Schiff and your congressional delegation in California would be fantastic. And know that we're trying to do this at the national level with, the Presbyterians, National Council of Churches. So we're thinking along the same lines. I like that synergy.
Yes, and it'd be great for you as a speaker, even if it was on a Zoom or a small conference or whatever it is.
You know how to find me now. Just hit me up.
Okay, thank you. You're in the chat, right? All right, thank you again.
Jasmine, are you back with us?
I don't see her. I think Donna had her hand up. Fernando has a hand up. I don't know if that's a residual hand.
Hi. Briefly, yeah, it's very inspiring. I'm really feeling activated by this, that maybe I can do a little more in this world before I pass on. I shouldn't be going there already, but I'm in this acute rehab, so I'm appreciating every minute I got here. And what I want to say, I had to miss some of it because of the kind of comings and goings that happen here. So I want ICU JP to be sure to tell me how to get hold of the videos, because I've never learned how to do that, and I really want to hear the part I missed. And thank you so much for your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Can I quickly respond that Donna and everyone, you simply go to icujp.org. That's our website. And there's a link to the archival recordings. It will take a few days for our communications director to review, edit, and post this one.
I'll try again. Thanks.
Hey, Fernando, do you have something else you want to share?
Yes, really what's happening is really the criminalization of Yemenis people, and I guess my question is that could this reach the UN, what you call this, organization? Because really this is a criminal act, not just by the United States, but it's subject to criminal. How do you say that? I forgot. But you know what I mean, right?
The International Criminal Court, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes, the ICC, and is that ICC? But can that be reached to the UN, or maybe is the UN has a position on this in terms of what's happening in Yemen?
Good question. So there was actually an accountability mechanism that was in place for Yemen through the UN, and it kind of inspected, and it made a lot of reports saying it never said definitively, but said that the U.S., U.K., and others that were supporting the coalition may be complicit in war crimes, and they documented a whole bunch of things. Saudi pressured, people on the Security Council and other folks in the UN, and they actually got rid of that accountability mechanism just last fall. So that is another potential push to do, is to try to get a new accountability mechanism, in place. As far as the ICC, it's hard to see that being super effective. I remain convinced that the way out of this mess is to get Congress to really assert itself. They are the part of our government most accountable to the people the most often. They need to hear from us. And that's where I think we have the most leverage here, because they have the power of the purse and can defund these activities. Where there could be, these other accountability mechanisms, but I would, as a U.S. citizen, really focus on this ongoing participation as our piece of leverage to wield here. But really good question, an important question.
Hey,
Jasmine's back.
Jasmine, back.
What like similar to Carol Francis, what can we do towards a solution? Like I hear a lot about the war. I hear a lot about, Russian aggression and, Ukraine. And I know it's the power of the purse. I agree with that too. But what do you think we can do as caring citizens and peace warriors to help the situation?
Thank you for that question. Really important one. Actually, I think maybe I want to give credit to Dr. Ruby Omar for the best idea so far, is to mobilize faith leaders in LA and really put pressure on Schiff to get on this war powers resolution. So yes, there's this macro thing going on, but I'll just say that you're not alone. There's a bunch of us working on this. The entire FCNL Quaker network is singularly dedicated to passing this resolution this year. We get thousands of Quakers all over the country. When you've pissed off the Quakers, you've done something wrong. You've done something very wrong. So we got backup, but I think it's really important to focus on Schiff right now and get him on this war powers resolution. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, but I would say if you want to do one thing, getting him on board, that's going to help us with Pelosi. It's going to help us with Hoyer. It's going to help us with McGovern. It's going to help us with Clyburn. It's going to help us with Meeks and Deutsch. And this is all the House leadership folks that we're focused on. If you can get Schiff, then maybe work with your San Francisco friends to put a little heat on Pelosi as well.
Okay, thank you. So any other new questions or comments?
I would like to ask a question. I was reading about the Stalin's war weapon of famine against the Ukraine in the 1930s. And I was wondering if there's any way we can send food. I know there's a blockade, but how can we, if you happen to know?
Yemen?
The Yemen, or even Ukraine now.
Yeah, I mean, here's my take, is that I don't really trust governments. I don't trust USAID, and I don't really and I don't think that the international NGOs are always, getting the aid to the right people. There's a lot of overhead, so when you contribute sometimes to these organizations, it's going to the bureaucracy of these aid organizations and not getting to the people. That's a real issue. I definitely support humanitarian aid, but I like more direct aid. I think the World Food Program is doing incredible work on the ground, so that's one organization, but maybe even an even better option would be Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. It's run by Aisha Juman, Dr. Aisha Juman, and she's from Yemen, and she works with Yemeni volunteers on the ground, and they get aid and medicine to some of the most impacted people. Trying to. I'm just gonna put their
Please. Thank you.
YemenFoundation.org. I think, if you're up for it, I think maybe a little lemonade for Yemenade stand.
Uh-huh.
You know, and then let's get Aisha, all the resources she needs, because that's going directly to the people that need it. And there's not a lot of overhead. They're getting food baskets to people in need. So
we can speak a little bit to that because we've trying to pay attention to which organizations actually can get the aid to the people who need it. And yes, we personally know Aisha Juman, and she's doing good work. There's also an organization called Pure Hands, which is Yemeni-Americans that are working on the ground in Yemen. Islamic Relief does good work. The International Rescue Committee, Doctors Without Borders isn't doing humanitarian relief, but they have done amazing work on the medical side. So there are a lot out there. You just kind of have to know. We have our own connections that we try to get assistance to people.
Can you put them in the chat, the organizations? Can you put the organizations in the chat?
Sure, I'll type those up. And anyway, we just kind of wanted to thank you, Hassan, for what you are doing. And it's complicated. We're kind of wondering about if the Americans do pull aid, what exactly is going to happen on the ground, because the different sides that remain are still going to be stubborn. They're not going to have as much strength to do some things that they want to. But we were just watching just yesterday a show on YouTube by the Yemeni commentator, comedian, kind of like the Patriot Act, and he does a once a week show. And yesterday's subject was the proliferation of mines that have been planted, particularly by the Houthis, all over the country. Hamad's hometown of Tais is under siege. People cannot leave. He has his sister there and relatives. They can barely leave out of town because of the extensive mines that have been planted everywhere, and it just wreaks havoc. There's 2 million mines that have been planted all over the country, and there are coalitions that are trying to clear it out, and sometimes they clear a place, and the countries come back and plant them again and clear them again, and it just wreaks havoc on villagers and people who going out to plant wood. Mine, the person doing the show called it stupid weapon because it's indiscriminate. It can hit anybody, a child, a mother, or somebody going out to sell their vegetables. So it's a very complicated situation and very terribly depressing. We left Yemen months after the bombing started in 2015. We went to Jordan and stayed there for a year and 7 months to get his immigrant visa, and came through the Taliban. Daily we're living their suffering, just seeing what's going on.
There's also the other side that I wanted to mention as the United Arab Emirates annexation of the South, which is also making things very complicated, because the the South could have been a safe haven for a lot of Yemenis who are stuck in places like in Saudi Arabia or anywhere, and who would like to visit, but the United Arab Emirates are doing, a lot of problems by annexation of the south, and taken also Socotra, which is also another environmental disaster. By just making it a military base for.
Yeah, for anybody who isn't aware, Socotra is an island. It belongs to Yemen, but it's off the Horn of Africa. So if you look on a map, you might think it's Somalia, but it actually belongs to Yemen. And it's been called the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean because of the flora and fauna that is so distinct to the island. Some 700 species of plants that don't exist anywhere else, and it's a migratory bird location, and just it's an amazing place. But unfortunately, we never went to visit, but it's extremely distressing to see a foreign entity come in and try to take it over and take it out of the hands of the locals and of Yemen who love it and want to preserve it.
Go ahead, respond to that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. Completely appalled by landmine policy by the U.S. and others. It's just a horrible reality that Yemen is facing, and if we pull out, if we end our support for the Saudis, doesn't magically end this conflict. I want to be clear about that. It doesn't, it doesn't really account, we haven't talked a lot about Houthi war crimes, but they've also been aggressors. They've also committed horrible atrocities, obstructed humanitarian aid, launched attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. And that we need accountability there as well. So my approach with this stuff is that, we live in the United States. We have a particular lever that I think we should pull. I think it's a kind of a root cause of a lot of the violence, is the Saudi blockade. I think it's something that Congress can do something about. But again, it doesn't magically resolve Yemen. But we do know historically that when you've got foreign powers involved in a civil conflict, that conflict drags out a lot longer. And my theory of change here is that if we can pry out Saudi, UAE, and hopefully Iran as well, we can actually, get back to more, peace process. And I think Yemenis, they've got a saying, and forgive me if I say this wrong. Please correct me, Mohammed and Lucinda. But I've heard from Aisha that it's me and my brother versus my cousin, and me and my cousin versus the stranger. And I think that this is an important thing to understand, is that, while the Yemenis might have a lot of issues with Ansar Allah, aka the Houthis, they see the Saudi as a bigger threat right now, and the Saudi onslaught and the Saudi blockade. And it's actually helped the Houthis gain more popularity and support, even as they're committing these horrible atrocities. And just like anywhere, you see, people, authoritarians sort of use whatever they want to use to sort of get their own power, and advance their own interests. And we see that exactly, going on here. The Saudis, they say, well, we're worried about the Houthis and Iran. Well, guess what? Everything they've done has emboldened the Houthis and Iran. So they're on their own merits. They are failing. And so that's really important, I think, for us to use our leverage to end support. As far as Socotra, I'm very concerned about this. I've just drafted an amendment to the Senate Foreign Operations, State and Foreign Operations budget, to defund any U.S. military support going to UAE that's going to support annexation of Yemen. I'm on it. I'm trying to find somebody to sponsor this. Maybe Schiff would do it. I don't know. Let's see if we can keep going. Our buddy Schiff, right? I'm pitching this to many people, and I think this is a huge issue. I don't think we're going to resolve this crisis until we get the UAE out. So I'm completely with you, working on it, so I just wanted you to know that. As far as something else beyond just ending military support, I do not endorse just cutting and running. We have a lot of reconstruction to do. I think we should hold Saudi and UAE accountable, push them to help reconstruction efforts, humanitarian aid efforts. So push for that, but also push for a new UN resolution to replace 2216. This is the old framework that was, basically written and passed through the UN Security Council resolution. It was written by Saudi Arabia, and it passed, and it said that the UN recognized government, Hadi must be restored to power. It said the Houthis need to give up all their weapons and territory, and unfortunately, what that might have made sense back in the day in 2015. But it doesn't make sense now. It is not a framework for any sustainable peace, so that needs to be scrapped. And they need a new one that is more balanced, that includes all of Yemeni society, Houthis, but also youth, women, girls, civil society. We need to have a new inclusive peace process, and that old framework is completely broken. So those are some of the other things that I'm thinking about and working on to address. But really appreciate that question and comment.
Okay, I'm going to call on myself here for a minute. This is an extremely valuable presentation. One of the things that I've been aware of is the extreme ignorance and apathy of the American public on this issue, and trying not to be one of those. I think we need to do a massive educational effort with the American public about this. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We need a ton of education. We need to educate lawmakers. We need to educate the right parts of our public. We don't have infinite resources here. So we need to be strategic about how we use them in this very short period of time, as we are approaching this vote. So I would focus on people in districts of leadership. I think for the purposes of this call, if you could put all your energy and resources into getting Schiff and Pelosi on our side, I think that's a real contribution to this whole effort. I think those two people are the linchpin. I think Schiff is going to be easier than Pelosi. I think Schiff is actually going to be on our side on this one, but he needs to be, bumped up. There's different tiers of support. We got something for everybody. And Schiff, we want him to. He probably will support, but we want him to co-sponsor and co-lead and help us get House leadership with us as well.
I think we're running toward the end of our presentation time here. Do you want to have any kind of closing comments about that?
For me, or
yeah,
just gratitude. Appreciate this discussion. I have, really enjoyed. I'm impressed that you all got up at 7:30 a.m. and to join us on this call. Shows your dedication to peace and your humanity. I hope we can meet each other in person someday. I'm here in DC, Capitol Hill. Please come rescue me here. But if I'm ever out in Cali, I'll be sure to say hi as well.
We would love that.
Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate all the work you're doing, and we can thank you enough. You're doing all the things that we are supposed to be doing. But in a better way. Thank you.
Steve wants to-
Thank you.
I really do want to thank Hassan on behalf of everyone here and even more broadly. I don't want to put you on the spot. Is your guitar nearby?
Yeah, it actually is.
We end our meetings with a circle, and we bring people after we have some announcements right now. Then we bring our people into a circle to lift up folks, and then we end the circle usually with a prayer or a closing thought. And if you have a few words to music that you think would inspire us in the week ahead without any warning, I'm asking if that's something you'd be comfortable doing at the end.
Sure.
Great. So if the guitar is important to that or a cappella, you decide. And I'll turn it back to Phil to do our finishing steps.
Okay. Anyway, I think we probably need to call attention to the green bucket, by which we mean when we were meeting physically, we passed a bucket around the table. But beyond that, since we are in a virtual environment here, that you can make contributions on our website through various mechanisms. So anyway, do we have any closing announcements that we need to hear?
Phil?
Yes, Rita.
Just a reminder that Reverend James Lawson will be doing his nonviolent workshop in the morning at 9 o'clock. Everybody's Zoom.
Yeah, Vita, I have dropped off the list for the online Zoom meetings with Dr. Lawson. And I wonder if you could post that on the chat.
Sure.
Yeah, somehow I've lost that link. Okay. Anybody else, Rose?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I thought my sound was off. PPC, Poor People's Campaign, are going to have this enormous rally, they hope, in June in Washington, D.C. And there's a big kind of fundraising push right now that they'll be sharing. I'm sure we'll get emails to try and sponsor some people to go to DC from California. It's going to cost a lot of money, but they really, really want to have a reasonably sized delegation from California at it. So I'm just giving people a heads up. There might be some demands for money here, and it's worthwhile. Thank you.
Rally about what in June?
The Poor People's Campaign. They will have a rally just basically expressing their needs, everything that we agree with, basically. But it'll be in June in Washington.
Wait a minute.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Even you had something else?
Yeah, can I?
Steve, you have your hand up again.
Yes, I want to make an announcement. One of our allies in the effort to end the death penalty Focus, is having its 30th annual awards event on March 24. It will be at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern, and it is virtual, and attendance is free. Of course, financial support is appreciated. Death Penalty Focus is honoring Senator Dick Durbin and Representative Ayanna Pressley, who are co-sponsors of the bill to end the federal death penalty, which Donald Trump and his Department of Injustice used so brutally in the closing weeks of his administration. We're also honoring a series of organizations and individuals who were instrumental in ending the death penalty in Virginia last year, the first former Confederate state and Southern state to end capital punishment. And finally, we're honoring the Honorable Robert Badinter of France, who as Minister of Justice led the ending of the death penalty in France in the 1980s and is helping lead an international movement to end the death penalty. There'll be lots of other special guests and introductions and shout outs and words of inspiration. So you'll get announcements of this over the ICUJP list, but please save March 24 at 6 p.m. on the West Coast for the virtual awards event. Thank you.
I'm also encouraging people to join the ending the systemic racism here in the U.S. because it seems there's a lot of talented people in this ICUJP, and maybe we can maximize to really fight this ending systemic racism. So join the committee on ending systemic racism. Thank you.
Right, and on that direction, we're having a gathering at my home in my garden, continuing the dialogue that we do every Friday on Sunday afternoon at 2 to 4. I put it in the chat.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, well, let's gather into our virtual circle here, where people can share issues or people that they want to lift up, and then we can close with a closing inspirational comment from Hassan.
Or song.
Well, I simply want to speak for everyone. In our hearts go out to the people of Yemen, the people of Ukraine. Hassan, I don't know if he was aware, but he echoed the words of the Reverend George Regas when Hassan spoke of the babies in Ukraine, the babies in Yemen and Palestine and Afghanistan and Iraq and all of these other war-torn countries. That echoes the words of the Reverend George Regas, our convener, in saying just that every single human life matters, and we cry out in grief for those dying and being starved today.
Yeah, I wanted to lift up the people of Yemen because they've been really suffering enough to this brutal aggression by the Saudi Arabia, and of course the U.S. is part of this. And we should, I'm a little bit late on this, but we know this has been for a long time, and I guess we become silent at some point. But I wanted to lift up particularly the victims, of massive people that been killed in Yemen. Thank you.
Yes, as all people of the world come together, no matter what nationality, no matter what race, no religion, whatever, whomever. just come together for the power of peace and understanding and clarity and support for all of the people of the world.
Yeah, Hassan, do you want to close us out?
Sure, I appreciate this so much because I get to be on the clock and play music. That's a win-win for me. So I was trying to think about what to play, but how are you guys feeling? You want to get like funky, or you want something like something introspective?
Energy, go out.
A little energy. Okay, this is one I wrote. It's called Four Walls: The COVID-19 Blues. And I wrote it because I'm tired of these divisive politics, and I think we got to come together to transform our world and society. And I think it's also okay to admit that this pandemic has you down a little bit. I think that's part of the healing and transforming process. So here we go. Wake up every morning and I don't wanna read the news. So every single headline gives me the COVID-19 blues. And it's a cruel world. We're living in a cruel world. We got to come together stronger. Like we don't got longer. We got to come together stronger. When the future of this world I want ain't like this sick whole world I see when I hear sirens in the distance, a million people screaming I can't breathe. I've got four walls and the truth, the COVID-19 blues. Well, yes, I do. Yeah. Politicians on TV, they're arguing again. And this shouting match is just too much to comprehend. I wish we'd make up like we bleed the same blood. We got to come together stronger. Like we don't got longer. We got to come together stronger. Doctor says stay at home till it is safe again. The governor's on Twitter preaching the lockdown's got to end. And it's like Wayne's World, strange world getting stranger. We got to come together stronger. Like we don't got longer. We got to come together stronger. When the future of this world I want ain't like this sick whole world I see when I hear sirens in the distance, a million people screaming I can't breathe. I've got four walls and the truth. Now I've got four walls and the truth. COVID-19 blues. Well, yes, I do. Yeah. I said I do. I said I do. And I bet you do too. Thanks, y'all.